Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Crusader Cody, and we're keeping it geekly with our new guest, Jeff Douglas Messner. We're here to break down sex, spies, and rock and roll. And it's time to get rocking. You know, we are celebrating Volume 3 and everything in between. Jeff, how are you doing? Welcome to the stream.
I am so great, Cody. Thank you for inviting me. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying warm in this snowstorm over here in Ohio. It's a blizzard out there, and we are cranking up the heat with an awesome campaign. But before we dive into this, Jeff, real quick, give us a nice little introduction to who you are and how you got into creating comics.
I am a lifelong comic book science fiction nerd, a lifelong fan of all of that stuff. Started reading comics when I was just a kid back in the Bronze Age. Of comics, not the Bronze Age of the world. Although my kids might argue with you on that. But I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a storyteller and a creator. And I, for a brief time in my teens, wanted to be a spy novelist, writing these caper spy stories in the 1980s, which I thought would make a great comic book. And I made one kind of pale stab at reaching out to an unknown artist at the time who was an up-and-comer. Gave him the first chapter of my spy novel and said, "Hey, man, it's like if you know anything going on, maybe you could look at this script and all this stuff." And a year later, I saw him at the next convention, and he had just gotten hired to take over the Justice League comic after Kevin Maguire. The dude's name was Adam Hughes, and
wow.
completely forgotten. And he was an unknown. I hung out with him a couple of summers at conventions when nobody knew who he was. And I was like, dude, this guy is really awesome, really talented. And I thought, I'm going to get him to draw. He's going to see the brilliance of what I want to do, and he's going to draw it. And I just waited too long because he became super famous. And I got to send him an email about a year and a half ago, reminding him of that encounter and telling him, hey, I'm now publishing those comics that I was trying to foist on you back in 1989.
It's like, hey, you better remember all those times I hung out with you.
I expect a variant cover at some point. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I was just a fan forever and ever. I decided to give up on writing the great American spy novels and went into playwriting because it was easier, and you don't have to describe things when you're writing for a play. You just write dialogue. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And ultimately, long story short, about 10 years ago, I became friends with one of my childhood heroes, artist, writer, creator, Mike Grell, and eventually convinced him to get some of his work back out in the world of crowdfunding. Because he has a tremendous fan base. And I knew nothing about crowdfunding. I knew nothing about any of this. I just knew that, hey, this is an avenue that now exists. And I helped him with a campaign. It was very successful. I kind of learned on the job the tricks of it. And I thought, maybe one or two of my projects I could turn into comic books and do this, because if you can get just enough people to give you money to pay for the cost of the art and the publishing, you can do this, not make any money necessarily, not get rich, but you could fulfill your creative dreams. And to me, that was very important. I thought, wow, being able to have this tangible thing that I've produced, how cool would that be? And along the way, being friends with Mike, I got asked to write a book about him for Tomorrow's Publishing. And in 2019, the book got nominated for an Eisner Award, completely out of left field. Here I was, a neophyte, not really in the comic book industry, getting nominated for an Eisner Award.
So let me ask you real quick, was that intimidating for you? Because you said he was like, you looked up to him, all that. Like, that had to have been just a lot of weight to hold.
It was, but he is such a just genuinely nice guy. When I first met him, in fact, I had written him an email back in 2003 saying, hey, I'm a playwright, and I think I could turn your John Sable freelance comic book story into a stage play. And he responded. It was like, that sounds like a really cool idea. Hey, if they can land a helicopter in Miss Saigon, they can probably do anything. And I was so intimidated that I never replied. I never got back to him. I just kind of blew it off. And 7 or 8 years later, I ran into him at a convention, chatted him up. A friend of mine locally, where I live in Asheville, North Carolina, was doing a convention in 2015 and was asking my suggestion of guests. And I said, hey, I've got Mike Grell's email address if it still works. And I emailed Mike and said, hey, this guy wants you to come and do a con. He did. Mike invited me to come and hang out with him at another con where he needed some help. His wife, who usually works with him, couldn't come. And he said, hey, I'm going to be like an hour from where you live next month. Do you want to come and hang out and work my table? And I was like, yeah, sure. And it was the most dead con you've ever seen. I'm talking Walking Dead con. I'm talking there was nothing to do, no one there. And we sat around the whole weekend with him and Mark Texiera and Steve Scott and just hung out and partied the whole weekend. And as a result, we became friends. And
I was gonna say that sounds like an even better experience, right? It's like it's almost better that it was dead, so you can get that that time.
It was great. We just hung out, and really found out that we liked each other. And I went from being a stalkery fan to being a pal, which was kind of nice.
You stalked long enough until you got in cool, man. It worked. It paid off.
That's right. Stalking pays off if you're just persistent long enough.
Not legal advice, though.
No. I was very polite about it. But now when his wife can't travel with him, he calls on me. And I was in Ohio and Cleveland and Columbus this past year at cons with Mike, doing cons and doing shows with him. He now has me do panels with him, and we have a great time. We have a really good relationship, good rapport, and we're publishing his stuff. We're bringing a lot of his stuff back and publishing it now. And between his projects, I do one of mine. So that's kind of my approach. Is I'll do one for him, and we'll get like a huge reaction to it, and then I'll do one of mine, and I ride the coattails of his fans and followers. Going, hey guys, while you're waiting on Mike's next project, I'm doing this, and and I pick up a few, and people now know me as being kind of Mike's collaborative partner in some of these projects, and I'm lucky enough that they like me and support what I do too. So, but anyway, that Eisner thing in 2019, we didn't win the award, but I thought, man, if ever there was a sign to me that maybe I should try comics again, I think I'm getting it. I think I'm being given these signs, and I started taking it very seriously. And here we are, 3 years later, and a pandemic later, and I ended up working out. I don't know what to say. It's weird.
So I mean, Spies, we have sex. I could see those two fitting together perfectly. But rock and roll, I mean, Spies, you got to be stealthy, right? Like, how do you mesh rock and roll into this scenario?
It's kind of funny. I wrote most of these stories when I was in high school, so it was during the 1980s, which you think of the 80s and you think of a certain aesthetic as far as music and fashion and things go. And when I picked it up and decided to give it a try again, there was that decision of, do I try to update it to modern times or do I keep it in its period? And I thought it's more fun in the 80s when spying was harder than it is now. Now all spy movies are like, satellite infrared images where somebody's talking into the earpiece of the spy going, all right, there's someone around the corner. No, it's like, I wanted it to be harder. It was tougher to be a spy, back then. There was more kind of, subterfuge and espionage going on. And as it turned out, one of the characters that I created originally, there were three brothers. One of them's a spy. The other two get a little too nosy and find out too much, and they get endangered, and this caper kind of ensues. And one of the brothers is kind of a bit of a playboy race car driver wannabe, washed out rock star who had an album deal and almost had a hit song but didn't quite. So he's like this reckless, whatever kind of playboy character, and he's the one that gets into trouble in the story that has to sort of be resolved. But when I went to resurrect the idea, I thought, no, I'll keep it in the 80s because it's more fun in the 80s. And now it's retro. Now, everybody's like, oh, the 80s are so cool, the retro style and the fashion. And I thought artists will have more fun drawing, things that look like 80s hair and 80s clothes and all of that stuff. And the idea of originally it wasn't going to be called Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll. Originally, it was just this one story that I was going to tell. But my son, who was graduating high school in the pandemic, revealed to me that he had been writing a screenplay. And I was like, oh,
wow.
I was like, where did this come from? Because, we were having those conversations of what are you going to do after high school? What's your plan? And we're in a pandemic, so who knows what the world is going to be. And he's like, well, I want to get into like film and television. And to me, that was a surprise. I was like, where did that come from? And I was like,
proud dad moment though, right?
Totally. It's like all the things that I was into as he was a kid growing up rubbed off on him. And I'm like, oh, it's all my fault. I took him to like too many theater rehearsals, right? He hung around artists and musicians, and oh my God, now wants to be one. And he said he was writing a screenplay, and I was like, prove it, show me. I've got to see it. And of course, with his dad being a writer, I'm sure it was intimidating to want to share because he'd seen plays that I'd written being produced successfully and all of that stuff. But I started reading his screenplay, and immediately I was like, oh my God, this is almost the same style of stuff I was writing when I was in high school. And it made me think, oh, there's this sort of weird kind of circular thing happening. If I'm doing my thing, maybe I should do his too. So I secretly had an artist do the first scene of his screenplay as 12 pages of a comic book, and gave it to him for Christmas that year and said, hey, I'm going to publish this as a backup story in mine. So I'm going to do mine, and this will be the backup story. And when I launched the crowdfunding campaign for that, it became really popular for some reason. I think the 80s, the sex, the spy, the rock and roll thing. And I called it that because it was no longer just one book. It was like, oh, it's a bigger thing. It's no longer just one thing. It's going to be more than one story. So what's a good title for an 80s spy, caper, fun adventure sort of thing? And I was like, sex, spies, and rock and roll. Like, oh my God.
I love that so much. Like, I'm a dad myself. I have 3 kids. So the fact that not only did he follow in your shoes was awesome, but then you're like, I'm going to take this, I'm going to put some art behind it, and then I'm going to gift it to you for Christmas. I could only imagine his reaction. He probably lost it.
It was pretty cool. It was one of those sort of defining moments. And it was his senior year of high school. So you're getting to that last Christmas. I don't know how old your kids are, but when
10's the oldest.
There you go. So you've got about 8 more years before it's like, oh, this is the last time it's going to be like this. And I wanted his last gift on that Christmas to be something really special. And then to turn around and 6 months later, publish it, to put it in a book and publish it. And the idea of it becoming an anthology grew out of how popular it became the first crowdfunding campaign. People kept bidding and kept pledging, I should say, and I had to add stretch goals. And so I was like, what am I going to do for stretch goals? Okay, I'll do a 6-page backup if I reach another $1,000 or whatever. And like 2 days later, boom, it's reached. I'm like, oh my God, I got to do 6 new pages of story and art.
Not a bad problem though, right?
No, it's not a bad problem, but it went from, originally it would have been about a 48-page book, and the final published version of it is 116 pages.
It's a couple thousand. Oh my God.
It just would not stop. And so I thought, I have this whole universe of characters now and kind of offshoots that all revolve around the same core universe of this spy agency. And I could tell all these different stories. And it opened a door in such a way that I've been in the most creative phase of my life over the past few years because of the energy that got fed into it by the response of people on Kickstarter. I had categories where you could pledge a large amount of money and you would be drawn as a character in one of the backup stories. Your visage would be used as one of the characters.
That's so cool.
And I had over a dozen people on the first campaign going, I want to do that. I want to do that. I had a friend of mine from high school back in the day who had read these horrible stories I was writing in my teenage years, who was like, I want to be, a Russian bad guy. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and I came up with a character for him. And in volume 2, he wrote one of the features in volume 2 and got an artist friend of his to illustrate it about his character.
That's so cool.
It was so like, cool. This is insane. But it just has kind of kept growing and growing like that. And so it's turned into this weird, massive universe of characters spread across 30 or 40 years worth of timeline. Because now, instead of just being the 80s, the 1985 is the core. It can bounce backwards and tell stories before that as to how they got there. But also my son's story is more contemporary. So I had to figure out a creative way to tie it to the rest of the universe. Like, how do we get from here to his story there and make it so that eventually when somebody reads all of this stuff that has been put together as graphic novels and comics, when they read it all, they go, oh, it's all one universe. It all tells one giant story that spans 40 years. And I thought that just was this gift that dropped into my lap from the cosmos, because that's one of the coolest things that I've ever thought of doing. And suddenly it's been enabled because of social media, because of crowdfunding. It's nuts. You can tell I'm as shocked. I have imposter syndrome all the time too. And hanging out with Mike Grell, I do it too, because people are treating me with respect. And I'm going, dude, I'm just the guy, who's following him around. It's just a weird place to be, but I'm happy that it's what I'm doing right now.
It sounds like it's the right place to be. It sounds like all the forces in the world lined up for this to happen. It's such a cool experience that not only, were you able to meet some of your heroes and get them involved, but your own child as well. So I think right now would be
it couldn't have happened when I wanted it to happen back when I met Adam Hughes in the late 80s, early 90s. If it had happened then, it wouldn't have worked. And so as frustrating as it was to not achieve that when I was 19 years old, now was the time, not to be too, spiritual or cosmic.
No, I mean,
it couldn't have happened any time until now. And now that it has happened, it's like the floodgates are open.
It almost feels like, that connection with your son, like kind of helped ignite, like reignited, like the whole fire, so that's like the key right there. That I think it's so awesome, He
doesn't realize it. And he'll see this interview and maybe he'll be like, yeah, I knew all along, because he's that age. But yeah, it was him. I had the idea that I wanted to brush off this old spy story. And I had an artist who I sent it to, and he was doing some designs for me. And it was working. I was like, oh, this could really work. This could be something really, really cool. And it wasn't until my son came up with his screenplay and his story, and I had the idea of using that in the comic, that turned this into this massive thing. He just has I guess he has no idea. I don't know, but I owe him all the credit, because his reminding me of how I was at his age as a writer, and the kind of stories that I was telling at his age as a writer, brought me back full circle to the place where like I said, the floodgates opened. I was just able to suddenly explore all of these possibilities, and it's been successful as a result. And I don't know why, and I don't know that I want to explore too deeply, why or why not. It just is, and I'm just grateful that it's working.
I think right now would be a perfect segue. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of that success, because right now your campaign on Zoop is just absolutely killing it. And we're going to put this link in the chat. Guys, if you are watching, be sure to check this out with us. If you're able to back, it is New Comic Book Day. Be sure to pick up this awesome Volume 3. If not, simply putting this on Facebook and Twitter. Word of mouth is 100% free, and I'm sure you're going to have a friend or family member who is going to love this. So we are looking at Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll Volume 3. Volume 3 of the hit Spy...
And that's a cover. The cover of the new book is by artist Steve Scott. Check him out. If you don't know who he is, you'll look him up and you'll see that you do know his work. Steve Scott is a friend of Mike Grell's, and now a friend of mine. And I emailed him and said, I have an idea for a cover, because he emailed me and he said, hey, I've got some free time if you need me to do a cover or do anything for Mike. And I said, well, I've got an idea for a cover for Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll. And I sent him the Jim Steranko Nick Fury Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. cover that looks a little bit like this from the 60s. And I said, do this, but do this with my female lead, and make it 80s. And this is what he came up with.
So we're currently $5,372 of a $10,000 goal, 108 supporters with 29 days left to go. I know you said you launched this yesterday, so like a day and a half. Fantastic numbers, Jeff. Holy crap.
I'm over the moon. I can't believe it. I was getting involved with the Zoop guys. I thought, hey, I'll give it a try and see how it goes. I had done this with Kickstarter and been successful, but what they're offering as a support team just really impresses me. And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go with them and try. And I'm so glad I did, because this is out of the gate. This is the most successful of any of my campaigns thus far as how quickly it's gotten to that level.
So real quick, let's take a look at some of these rewards. We have the digital copy of this for $12, outstanding price, for 72 pages of content. Now, next up for $28, you can get 1 through 3 digital bundle. How many pages would you say that is between the three?
The first one is 116. The second
Wow.
one is 64, and the new one is 72. So the first one is kind of a double-sized thing. I'm trying to keep the volumes going forward around the 64 to 80 page zone. So
that's still a lot of bang for your buck.
200 pages or more if my math skills are not that great, but I'm guessing that's over 200 pages, right?
Yeah, I would say pretty close. And then for 45, you have Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll volumes 1 through 3, plus the all spin-off series issues, all digital bundle for $45. So another big bang for your buck there. We have the physical copy of volume 3 at $25. And once again, that's 72 pages. So, man, that is such awesome content right there for the volume 3. All 3 physical bundle for $70. So a awesome price right there too. Zoop is really nailing it with these tiers.
They've created some really, really great stuff. And when we were talking about it, I always undervalue myself, and they were just like, no, this is how much this would be. This is how much this would be in retail. And I was like, $12 or something. And they're like, no, look, you need to believe in yourself. And
72 pages is a lot.
It is. And, I pay all of the artists, colorists, letterers, everybody that works on the project, gets paid. Except my son.
He just gets he gets to live.
He gets the bragging rights at college that, oh hey, I'm a published comic book writer. But no, for the most part, the artists on this are all being treated as professional as part of the team. There is one story in volume 2 that my high school friend wrote and a friend of his drew that they did, and I graciously allowed them to include it in the book, but eventually they'll reap the benefits of it too.
Some awesome add-ons and commissions as well, guys. Be sure to, right here is that link. Be sure to check this out. And be sure to nab these up too. It looks like some of them are already getting bought out. So we have the digital commission right here, and then get drawn into the comic, unavailable. So you guys want to get it while it's still piping hot.
Several artists who work on the book are doing original sketches. One of them is sold out, but there are several others in there as well. But they are going fast. There's some popular ones in there.
So, man, what an awesome campaign. I know you were on Indiegogo and Kickstarter previously.
Yes.
And so good experiences with Zoop, right? You said this has been your most successful campaign thus far?
We the first campaign, every campaign that I've done in the first 24 hours, nothing has touched how successful this one is.
Wow.
And I was blown away by how successful those were when I was doing them. So this is almost double what it was before. And I think that's because Zoop, what they bring is a very classy sort of. And I kind of, as I'm telling people, it's like, oh, you're going to do another Kickstarter. And I said, no, I'm going to go with Zoop. And they're like, well, tell me what the difference is. And I'm like, it's more of a boutique kind of company. The Kickstarter, and I love Kickstarter. There are thousands of creators with comics on right now on Kickstarter. You can go support, and you should. But on Zoop yesterday, mine was one of 3 campaigns that are currently live. They're more selective. They're more discerning with what they do and who they invite. And I could not have been more honored that Jordan reached out to me last year and started a dialogue and then came and met me at Heroes Con in Charlotte this past summer, talked more about it to me and to Mike Grell. And when Jordan left, Mike and I were talking, and we were just kind of going over what Jordan had told us. And Mike was a little more skeptical. He's like, it took 2 years to get him to do a Kickstarter to begin with. He's not on social media because he doesn't trust it. He's an older guy. He kind of comes from that. And I said, well, hey, look, my next campaign I'll do with Zoop, and we'll see how it goes. We'll give him a test and see how it goes. And I'm gonna talk to him tomorrow. Call him tomorrow and talk to him because we're working on a big project of his. And I'm gonna be like, I can't see a downside. Honestly, so far this is just off the charts good. And so I would expect maybe a Mike Grell project on Zoop before the year is over.
Let's go. Jeff, thank you so much for swinging by, breaking down this awesome book and everything in between. Before we let you go, I always love asking for a little bit of advice. So for anyone who might be new to creating and listening in, what type of advice would you give them just for starting out? You know, if you could help them maybe just get motivated with what they're doing.
You know, I had this question at a panel in Columbus at GalaxyCon about a month and a half ago. And there were some people there who were generally, you could tell, interested in exploring this. And my biggest piece of advice is just do it. And by saying just do it, you don't have to have the lofty goal of matching the monthly sales of Batman or X-Men or whatever. If you have a story that you want to tell, you can find an artist. I found all of my artists through social media groups, and they're from all over the world. And there are places where you can go and gather with other like-minded people and find collaborators. It is not that hard. Find someone that is willing to work with you, that you feel can draw your book or do your book the way you want to, or vice versa if you're an artist. And just start that conversation. You can put it on Kickstarter or any of those platforms and get enough money to publish enough issues to give your family as Christmas presents at the very least. Or if you accidentally become successful, like Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll did, you can print, a 600 copy print run and be up to your eyeballs mailing them out to backers for the next 3 months of your life. But the thing is, the satisfaction creatively that you get just by doing it, I think will make you more confident in yourself as a creator. There is a real sense of accomplishment. There's a real sense of, I did a thing. And there are other people, and it doesn't matter if they're 20 or 2,000 of them. And there are other people who saw it and went, hey, that was really awesome. Way to go. When are you doing your next one? Sometimes that's all people need, is just that little nudge. You never know until you try. And so that is my piece of advice. Just do it. Just do it. It's not that hard. 20 years ago, this was impossible. It's not that hard now.
I love it. I love it so much. Thank you. That motivated me. I want to get, after this, back into my understanding comic book, start reading some more pages out of it, and get to writing. Thank you so much, Jeff, for not only the awesome, breakdown of everything, but the great piece of advice as well. Everyone watching, here is the link. Be sure to back this. You have, 28 days left to go. And you want to make sure you grab some of those specials before they're bought up and unavailable. So with that being said, guys, be sure to check it out. It is a lovely Wednesday. I hope you all have an awesome night. Most importantly, though, keep it geekly.